Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about the biggest mistakes retirees make when leaving the USA.
There are a lot of mistakes people make when they leave the USA because it's the first time they've done it. And if you haven't checked with someone that's done it before, you can fall into some of these pitfalls and traps. We did fall into a couple of them, not all of them, but we're here to tell you what they are so that you don't make these same mistakes that a lot of people make, and it costs them a lot of time, money, and energy to recover from this. So the first one is a mistake that we made, and we talked about it a little bit in our video on if you should sell your house, and that is putting your stuff in storage when you leave the United States.
Yeah, and I think this is a very big mistake because, and why we made it is because you're thinking to yourself, well, maybe I'll save some things in case I decide not to continue traveling. And I think that's what our thought process was, why we put stuff in storage to begin with. But honestly, after a year and a half, almost 2 years, we realized we've only been to the storage unit maybe once or twice. We're just wasting our money. And then decided, gosh, we don't need any of the stuff that's in there. There were very few things that we actually ended up keeping in the long haul. Very small, one very small like file box size of mementos from when our kids were little. And then we were storing a few things for our kids. We mailed those things to them. And then we were able to completely get rid of the storage unit. That made a huge difference because that's already money in your pocket right out of the gate.
Yeah, if you do the math on that, if you have a storage unit for 2 years, you're spending thousands of dollars, and likely the stuff in the unit isn't even worth $3,000 resale, which you could sell it used for. So or what you could buy it back for even. So it's just not a good idea to keep stuff in storage long term. You're generally always going to lose money on that. People think, I don't want to get rid of stuff, but you can always buy stuff back, and newer and cheaper. So the second mistake people make is not having enough credit cards with no transaction fees on them too. That's another big point.
Yeah, and those add up really fast. When you are traveling full-time, you are going to be using your credit cards a lot. Surprisingly, many places all around the world would prefer to do a contactless transaction, and that is with, tapping your credit card, and that makes it way easier. But if you have a transaction fee, a foreign transaction fee on your card, that is a lot of money leaving your pocket every single month. So make sure that you have enough of those cards with you that you're able to do that, and also make sure that you have more than one option in order to withdraw cash without having to worry about any other fees as well.
Yeah, we've had some things happen to us and seen it happen to other people where we've had a card get a fraud alert and the bank just notified us and said, hey, we're shutting this card down, we're going to send you a new one. Well, that's great, but I'm in Thailand, so I'm not going to get that for like 6 more months. So when that happens to your credit card, if you don't have 3 to 4 of them, really, you should have, with no transaction fees, you can get 2 to 3 of them blocked for fraud, and they're just going to send you a new one, or they may expire. You really have to have backups, because the last thing you want to have happen is to be in halfway around the world, all your credit cards are not working, and you're just kind of stuck. That's just not going to work. So, to safeguard against that, we get several credit cards, and you don't have to use them all. We use them all for different purposes, but that's a really big consideration to make, which credit cards you want. A couple of good ones we've got linked down below that we use is the Chase Sapphire Reserve. That's one of the best ones for travel. It does come with a high annual fee, but that's where we get our lounge access from, which is really quite good when you travel. And then we do a couple hotel credit cards. We do the IHG, we do the Marriott. We'll link those below. We have separate videos on those, but those are great ones to use, no transaction fees, and having 3 to 4 of them just makes you feel safe.
Yeah.
Because we did see a guy too, we talked to a guy who only had one. And he put it in the ATM to get some cash out, and the ATM ate his card. And he was like running all around town trying to find the branch, and I think he finally got it back after a few weeks, but it was a rough few weeks for him because he had no other way of getting money and paying for things. So that's a big consideration.
Yeah, and that happened in a country here in Asia. So Not like it happened in his home country. It happened while he was, halfway across the world and not being able to get out cash. Cash is really important also to have. And don't feel like, oh, I've got all these cards, I'm scared, so there's going to be a problem with it or whatever. You can always lock them in the app. We tend to lock almost all of ours and just kind of rotate using them. And that way there is no problem with the card, because if you have it locked and someone tries to use it, they can't because it's locked. So there are lots of great options that you have with having your credit cards, and with having several options with you, it's extremely helpful. You'll be surprised how quickly you will be like, oh, thank goodness, I'm glad I had a card that I could use as a backup.
Next mistake people make is not understanding the visa rules for foreign countries. Now, if you grew up in the US like we did, odds are you don't really understand the visa rules even for the United States. When people come to immigrate in, I still don't understand them, because it doesn't apply to me. You live there, you're there. But there are visa rules for people coming into every foreign country. And, growing up, I grew up in Michigan, we're near Canada. Just go to Canada whenever you want. You go to Mexico, you go whenever you want. You just kind of get lulled into thinking, and it's true of Europe too, you can pretty much go on vacation there whenever you want. But there are limits to how long you can stay in each and every country. So you do need to know that when you're traveling long term. Some of them are more restrictive than others, and some of them are more lenient on how often you can enter a country. So that's a huge consideration.
Yeah, another thing to keep in mind is oftentimes you will have to apply for a visa before you arrive to that country. So you'll need to apply either online or through an embassy, depending on where you're traveling to. So make sure that you have got the most up-to-date information, because the other thing is that the rules change all the time.
They do.
I mean, we entered a country and we had wished that they had changed this rule before we arrived to the country, but they ended up changing it like 2 weeks after we arrived, and instead of a 30-day visa, you could then get a 90-day visa, and we were so bummed because it would have been so nice to stay for the 90 days, but we got in there before they did it, and so we only had the 30 days, and it was one of the countries where you have to apply beforehand, and in order to get an extension, it was like a whole thing, so we ended up just leaving anyways, as we had already planned. But it would have been so nice if you knew that ahead of time. But just know that those rules are constantly changing for a lot of the countries all over the world, from Europe to Asia to the African countries, and even in the US it changes quite a bit too if you're traveling from outside the US into the US.
Yeah, accurate as of this taping, we can give you kind of an idea of what it's like for us, what it's been like. The only two countries we have to apply for online for a visa so far have been India and Vietnam. Those are the ones that are a little more, you got to think it through a little bit. The Japan gives you 90 days as an American. Malaysia gives you 90 days as an American. Most other countries give you 30. Vietnam gives you 90 also now. That is the one that was 30 and is now 90. But Thailand gives you 30, Indonesia gives you 30. Pretty much all of Europe gives you 90 days, but you only can do that once every 6 months. So it's kind of a little bit of a planning situation with that. You can't just go to Europe for 6 months. You've got to go for 3 months and then do a little shenanigans to get out of there and then come back in. So
go to the Balkans or the UK and then come back.
So yeah, so you got to think that through a little bit, because otherwise if you just start booking places that are non-refundable, you actually can't stay in the country, or you're going to get fined or something like that. So think that through before you do it. Look those up and you'll be just fine. The next mistake people make is predetermining before they've left the US where they're going to live for like the next 5 years. It's difficult because you haven't been to all these places, and we see a lot of people that did this and then they finally leave that one place they picked, and then they're like, why did I not go all these other places, because these are amazing.
Yeah, we've seen people, say, oh, I'm just going to go get a long-term residency in Mexico, and they go through all the trouble, jump through all the loopholes, get something like that, and then they realize, oh, I think I want to travel someplace else, and then they go someplace else and they're like, whoa, I really like it here. Now I have this, long-term residence visa for Mexico. Probably not going to use it after I went all through all the trouble and spent the money and all that kind of stuff. So you don't want to waste your time on some of those things. Give yourself a chance to try places out, because you will actually surprise yourself. I know we were so surprised when we completely fell in love with Thailand. We just thought this was just a place we were going to pop in for a couple months, visit it, take it in, explore it, move on to the next place. We got here and we were completely head over heels in love with it. Never would have imagined that. I would have made arrangements for something else had I known that.
Yeah.
Had I not, known that ahead of time.
Also, don't recommend buying a house your first year in a country, because you really just don't know. Take that first year and visit all these countries. Then you can sit back and evaluate it, make a plan. And for us, sometimes our thoughts have changed on countries even in our second and third visit to the country. So you're not going to hit every city in every country. And a lot of these countries, cities are different. Like, what if you went to New York City in the US and then, you went to a city in Florida or a city in Texas? Completely different. So you may love one, you may not like the other. Give yourself enough time to try out all the possibilities before you commit to something long term. Next one that people make a big mistake is not having a cohesive travel plan. They just kind of shoot from the hip, and at the end of the year they realize, why did we go from Iceland to Thailand, then to Norway, and then back to somewhere warm again? Because we're just ping-ponging all over the world, and we're spending a lot of money changing our clothes out, and we're spending a lot of money in flights, when we could have just done this in a logical order, where once you get to Asia, your flights are really cheap within Asia. Same with Europe. Once you get to Europe, the trains and the flights are less than $100. So you don't want to be flying from one continent to another. You want to go do Europe and then do all of Europe. And then you want to do Asia, do all of Asia, not going back and forth.
Exactly. I think that's where also a lot of the budgets kind of blow up, is when people are, flying from one continent to the next and then another one and then back, and, from the top of one continent to the bottom and just all over the place. You need to kind of put together a plan that makes sense with where you're headed to the first place, and then just kind of roll with the punches from there. Oftentimes we'll fly to Europe and say, okay, we're going to start in Switzerland. And then from Switzerland, we could take a train to Italy. Okay, that's great. We'll take a train to Italy, and then we can explore Italy. And then, you just kind of flow from there. Same thing, like he said, with Asia. You can, fly to Asia, go into Malaysia or Thailand or whatever. And from there, you can get flights for, $60, $80 from one country to the next. Or you can, some of the times you can take trains as well. So there are tons of options, and really inexpensive if you plan it out and so that it makes sense with where you are and you're not zipping all over the place. And also, like you said, having to drag around warm weather clothes and cold weather clothes. People ask us about that all the time with packing. We kind of make a rough plan of what type of weather we're going to be in, and then pack that kind of stuff. And then if we're moving from there on to cold and just switching then for a long term, then we'll buy stuff and add that to what we already have.
Yeah, and a lot of people ask us, well, how do you make that plan? Like, it's so overwhelming because you could literally do anything. So where do you even start? And the way we approach that is, each year we look at some things we want to do, but we really scour the internet for like the best deal we can find for something amazing at an amazing price. So like, for instance, in 2022, we found a deal in Italy where we were getting a 2-bedroom house on the ocean with a rooftop deck and all this amazing things. And it was like $700 a month we got this deal for. And so we booked that. So the first thing we booked, that's like the anchor. And then we build everything else around that. Because then it's like, well, okay, we're going to be in Italy. So now what else can we find in Italy either before or after that? Or what if we went, now we know we're basically in Europe for 2 to 3 months. So what else can we find there? You don't want to just be shooting all over the place. And this year, same kind of thing. We knew we wanted to be in Thailand at the end of this year, December, January, for her birthday. That's where she wanted to be. So we scoured and we found this deal here, and then we start building around that. You don't just want to start building the whole year at once. Pick one amazing deal, book that, and then build out both sides of that, and you'll eventually then fill it up in a logical order. That's what works for us.
Yeah, it makes the most sense really when you have like an anchor
Yeah.
place or deal, and then, like you said, work off of the front. I mean, we had this place booked in March, but we didn't know what we were doing to get here. We
Before
just
or
knew
after,
that this
yeah.
is where we wanted to be, and we got the deal. Same thing with Italy. We knew we got that place, and we were like, okay, well, where do we want to go that's going to lead us there? And then where are we going to go that's going to take us away from there and just build off of it? It really makes a ton of sense when you work it that way.
Yeah, and sometimes it's like you find a great cruise, and so we've done that too. We're like, oh wow, we got this cruise. It's a 21-night cruise. We got a balcony, and it's like $1,500 for the 21-night cruise. We just booked that 'cause it's an amazing deal, and then wherever it ends up, that's where we're building off of from there. So you can usually find something in just about any area. The next mistake people make is only visiting bucket list countries. And we did this a little bit, and the reason this is bad, luckily for us, some of our bucket list countries fit the criteria that I'm about to say, which is that if you spend your first year only going to bucket list items, you haven't done any research for the long-term viability of this type of lifestyle. In other words, you need to find out what your baseline is for staying in inexpensive countries, and also countries where you can go get good medical care if you need to. So, for instance, we wanted to go to Norway, we wanted to go to Iceland, and we did all those things, but those aren't countries that we're looking at to stay long term. They're just simply too expensive, and it's just unfeasible to live there year round as a traveler because the costs are so high. So we did do those things, but on our bucket list was Thailand and was Vietnam and things like this. So while we did those really expensive ones and we spent 3 months in Europe, we also hit some of the countries that would be more viable for long-term travel. And a lot of people miss that. They only go to the big expensive ones. They want to do 2 months in Paris, London, Australia. Well, you can't really live that way long-term, so you won't really know. You're not really learning anything from that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's the next one?
Packing way too much, and we did that one too.
We had when we first started, we had 3 checked bags, and each had a backpack, and I had an extra bag, like a purse type thing. And that was way too much to keep track of all the time. Plus the stuff was borderline almost too heavy. Whereas now we each have one bag that we check. Now, we personally are not of the, carry-on only crowd. That's great if that's what you want to do. It's a preference. It's not any better than if you check your bags in, because 9 times out of 10, you're gonna have to check your carry-on only bag anyways, especially if you're traveling within some of these countries. A lot of the airlines in Europe as well as in Asia that we've tried, the budget airlines, they have really strict requirements for the carry-on bags, and usually your carry-on's going to be either overweight or too big for the overhead storage. So really, you want to go ahead and still check, a bag, which is what we do. So we got it down to just one check bag each, and it's on the smaller side. It's not quite a carry-on luggage size, but it's a little bit bigger than that. So it's a manageable size. It's a good weight where we can carry it easily up and down stairs, because you end up having to do that. And that's a big problem with having too much with you, is there's lots of places where there are no escalators and no elevators. So you're stuck carrying those bags up and down stairs. And if you have too much, let me tell you right now, it is not fun at all, especially in places where it's really busy and just, you're in the way with your bags and it's just going to be a hassle.
Yeah, and I think the turning point for us was when we first went out. We had way too much stuff with us. The reason we had way too much stuff was because we packed all our clothes. What are we going to want for the year? And then we realized this is just a really bad idea, because clothes are so cheap to buy overseas. If you're buying clothes in America versus buying clothes even in Europe, especially in Asia, they're like a third of the price. And so now when we leave America, we only bring 5 things with us because we know as soon as we get to wherever we go, we can buy new stuff way cheaper. And so that has really reduced the load for us having to drag around these clothes because you just don't need them.
Yeah.
The next one for mistakes people make is not having a plan for their phone, for their wireless, and spending way too much on that. And we finally settled on something after many years.
Yeah, well, for a long time, one of the things we did was we would get a SIM card as soon as we landed. We'd get it at the airport if we could, or we'd already have a place scouted out in town that we would go to and do that. A lot of times what would happen though is like you would land after hours and you couldn't get one, and there wasn't one at the airport. Or like one time, we landed in Athens, Greece one time, and it was like a 3-day weekend and we couldn't get a SIM card for like 3 days. So we had no cell service, walking around town trying to look at maps, all that kind of stuff. It was really kind of challenging. But with the great evolution of the eSIMs, it has been absolutely amazing. So easy, and you have it set up ahead of time. It has made our life so much easier. We land somewhere and we already have service. As soon as the plane, those wheels hit the ground and they say, welcome to such and such country, you can take it off of flight mode and you have service instantly on the plane, which is great because then you don't have to worry about, I gotta go stand in line and all that kind of stuff. So we use AirAllo, and it's a great service because you can get you can get a local SIM, like if you wanted to get one for just Thailand or just France, you could do that. But if you're going to be traveling around a region for a long time, like we are in Asia, we get a regional SIM card for Asia, and it covers all the countries that we're looking at going. So our service is basically just continuous. It just latches on whenever we land in a new country. It latches on to whichever network is good right then, or the strongest. It'll latch onto it, and you've got service from that country with absolutely no problems, which is awesome. There's also a global option. It's a lot more expensive, but if you're going to be switching continents and such, then maybe that would be a better option or a good use for something like that. We did it when we were on a transatlantic cruise. We did it for that because it was easier, and then we were going to be flying to Asia. But for the most part, I highly recommend either the regional SIM or the local SIM.
Yeah, so those are the biggest mistakes that you can make. We've made some of them. Hopefully you won't make any of them, and your travels will be very smooth when you leave the U.S.
Yeah, guys, hopefully this is helpful to you. If you have more questions, leave those for us down in the comments. Who knows, maybe it'll turn into a video here on the channel. We also have links for you for a lot of the things that we discussed here earlier, from the AirAllo eSIM plans to what we travel with, all those kinds of things. Links are down in the description. Guys, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.